So there's a lot of information online on elk calling, and you know, you can get really carried away with elk calling where everybody, like, you know, I even just recently I decided to listen to some podcasts and get other people's opinions, because for me, you know, I come up with my own theories, right? Like I've been in the woods a lot. I've called in a lot of elk. That's probably between elk and mule deer, that's been our biggest, that's probably what our family hunts the most, especially elk. Like we're diehard through and through elk hunters. And I hear opinions from multiple different people. And, you know, so recently I decided to listen to, it was pretty cool. It was a wildlife biologist who's really studied elk vocals, elk behavior. And he was saying that, you know, there were certain vocals where they would play, and he's like, what would you think that elk's saying? And what's crazy with this is a guy who has heard elk his whole life. And he says that's a really tough one, right? And he said that a lot of times. And I think the reality is, so many people are so set when they hear an elk bugle, they think that elk is exactly saying this. We can do the best that we can, but sometimes it's not just about hearing the elk, but also seeing what they're doing too. But the reality, so I'm saying this twice, I guess, but the reality is I'm going to give you the sequence that we use in calling. But the one thing I recommend to do on your own time is to mimic elk calls yourself. Because if you're copying me, you're gonna elk bugle according to Tom. And then when you share that information with somebody else, it's just slowly over time, the calling gets worse and worse, right? And so the best way to truly become a good elk caller and be able to call in these bulls is to actually listen. I recommend going online, listen to actual elk sounds, listen to the calls they're doing. I'm going to give you a basic rundown on how I call in a bull, but I still recommend, even after watching this, to go online and actually listen to elk bugle. And if you listen to any experienced elk hunter, they're not saying, oh, this guy taught me this call, this is what I use, and this is how I'm successful. Usually they say, I've been around elk, I've seen elk make this call, and that taught me to become successful. It's usually really skilled elk hunters are using calls because of what they heard an elk say. And so what I'm doing is I'm showing you exactly what I have heard elk say. And so when we're talking about elk calling, it's not even elk calling, it's elk talking. We are talking. This is a communication. We're having a communication with each other, right? And so I want to first talk about, there's three main calls, well actually four main bugles I want to touch base with. There is the location bugle. There is the display bugle. There is the challenge bugle. And there is the bugle that talks to the cows. I want to cover those four ones. And again, this becomes very controversial amongst other elk hunters. I could do this, and an elk hunter might say, that's wrong, do it this way. Like, everybody's going to tell you something different, but I'm going to tell you based on my own experience, right? So locate bugle is really simple. Let's start with that. Locate bugle. This is a bugle that I will use if I'm walking ridge tops or I'm walking in these deep draws. All I want to do is I want to locate an elk. Now, I want to use the example of people, right? Like, when we're talking to elk, it's just like people talking to people. If I'm walking down the street and I throw a challenge bugle at a person, and what I mean by that, if I say, hey, you want to fight? You want to go? People are going to stand back like, whoa, dude, whoa. Like, they're going to think I'm crazy, right? But what you do is you're trying to instigate a fight, and it has to start slowly, right? And so usually a fight doesn't start off by someone throwing fists. It starts off something very slow. That's what we're trying to do. We want, instead of throwing fists though, we want to challenge a bull to fight at some point. And especially a herd bull. We're talking specifically herd bulls in general. But it starts off, everything starts off with just a simple locate bugle. And let me show you that. It's a 3-note, where are you? It's very simple. And it's all you do. Listen, you don't have to do any chuckles. Sometimes I'll wait for about 15 to 20 seconds. Maybe I'll move on, or maybe if I'm really set that there's a bull in this area, I'll try a second bugle. And I like to hold that high note sometimes too. Just if I'm like, I know there's an elk here, he's just not talking. We need to locate this bull to make sure, hey, we're not walking past one, right? Again, very simple. Nothing, time to move on, right? Move on to the next draw. You know, I'm looking at these maps, and the one thing is too, is to always like think about that draws hold sound too. So if there's a draw next door that may not hear your bugle, it doesn't hurt to throw a bugle in there as well. I like to do this early morning, at first light, try to get a bull located so I can plan the day. A bull answers back. I hear a bull bugle. It's like, okay, sweet. Now I gotta identify, is this a herd bull or a rag bull, right? Sometimes just by calling, seeing what the bull's doing, I'll just keep doing just what I'm doing is more of a display bugle. It's not much more than a locate bugle, but you're doing like a show, you're showing each other off from a distance. And it's just a little bit more aggressive, not much. It's not as aggressive just yet, but you're showing a little bit more emphasis. Now he's talking to me. You could throw in some grunts too. That's fine. But you're trying to do a display bugle, trying to say, hey, I'm a tough guy. And so you're kind of feeling out an elk and seeing what he's going to do, right? If you start noticing that he's trying to run, he may be a herd bull, and it might be time to like just pay attention to the situation. Maybe you need to sit back and see what that bull's doing, right? And so if he's a runner or if he's a herd bull, I want to just slowly work on him. I'm just actively just doing these simple calls. As long as if he's not moving, that's fine. I'm going to keep calling. But if he starts to run, I got to stop calling because all I'm doing is pushing him out, right? That's what I call a display bugle. Let's say I'm at the point where I decided to move in on this bull and I want to challenge him. I want to challenge him to a fight. Then I get in closer. I get into this bubble, right? And this is usually what I do, especially with a runner, because if a bull's far enough away, he can push his cows away from me, right? He doesn't want his ladies taken. He knows I'm a threat. At the point where he thinks I'm a threat, he's going to move, right? But I want to get to a point to where I'm like, he can't run. I'm too close. I'm in his bubble. He's going to have to fight. So I get close enough to where it depends on how open the country is. If it's really thick, I can get under 100 yards, get up close and personal. And sometimes even to the point where you can hear them crashing in the brush, hear the cows moving. And at this point, then I'm throwing a challenge bugle. And that's just, all you're doing is you're emphasizing some more screams, right? And so I'll give you I'll give you a challenge bugle, and then another option too is you're doing what I would call, you're talking to the cows bugle, which can really upset a bull elk, a herd bull. So I'll do what I would consider as a challenge bugle. And what you're doing, you're just trying to sound upset. Like you finally have got to the point where like, we're fighting, I want your cows, there's no running. We're gonna have to fight. Or you better get out, you know, and just let the cows come to me. I've done it where I've gone too aggressive and it was a young bull and he just left the cows and the cows did come to me and the cows were like, well, you're our winner. And I'm like, sorry, I didn't really watch you. That does happen. The goal is we want to call in the herd bull to archery range, right? And so sometimes you just have to work on them a little bit more. But now we're going to a little more of a challenge bugle here. I add a little bit more growl. And the one thing I've done too, and I've noticed it almost sends a signal to elk. I've done that where I do a challenge bugle and they might run a little farther. I get quiet, I get close again. We do this little cat mouse game. But as soon as I get close and I do that challenge bugle and I actually grab a stick and start raking a tree, as soon as that other bull starts raking a tree, that bull signaled to me back that he's ready to fight. And if I hear that rake, I'm like, oh, it's on. But what's interesting is just when you rake a tree, it is a signal like this is happening. This is a fight going on. And I've done this where the bull keeps running. I'm like, why isn't he coming into my challenge bugle? If I am like, let me try a rake. I try a rake, I just slam a stick into the tree, and all of a sudden I hear that same thing going on. The fight's on. He's no longer running. He's preparing himself. So when they're raking, they're getting ready to fight. They're really amping themselves up. And so as I rake a tree, this is a tree that's a little bit harder. Sometimes it's nice if there's a little more bumps, it makes a little bit more sound, and you can break branches and stuff if there's a tree with branches, snapping the branches. I mean, elk are noisy critters, and you're making a lot of noise. And what you're doing, you're trying to match that bull's energy, and it actually doesn't, it's not a problem. I even talked to, so the owners of Phelps Game Calls, we would tell you the same thing. Sometimes what they try to do is they try to mimic the bull and what it's doing back. And it just fires them up and makes them mad. And what even makes it worse, and I'm going based on other tips and tricks too. So like Travis, my brother, when he calls for me, he cuts off the bull. So if the bull rakes and he screams, in the middle of that bull's scream, if you cut him off, and if you cut it off in the middle of a scream, that bull gets even more mad. You're just working him up. You're really pissing him off. And so you just keep raking, so you're working this up and you're raking. I actually sometimes like to use the bugle tube too. Just a little bit hollow. And then you're just playing this cat and mouse game. And there's a lot of different calling sequences. There's a point too where, there's this one bull, and it was kind of a cool scenario where the bull was starting to come in, and then he's like, I don't know if I really want to come in. And then he started sensing something was wrong. And so he started barking, and usually the bark, it almost sounds like a bugle that's cut off. That's like a deer blowing. That's like the hunt's over. Well, there was this bull, and it was a nice 6x6. Well, Travis mimicked that bull. Right when that bull did that, Trav did this. Travis pretty much called that bull a wuss. Like he said, you're wuss. Like, what? There's nothing to be afraid of here. Come and fight. And that bull screamed back and came running right in, and I stuck him. So what we learned with this is you're mimicking the elk. It really upsets them when you're mimicking them. It's no different if you're trying to start a fight and you're like, and you're trying to raise each other's voice. You're kind of competing with your voice. Like, I'm tougher, no, I'm tougher, no, I'm tougher. And you're trying to display yourself with the ladies, not just by your raking, it's all intimidation until the fight begins. And usually my indication, it's harder in open country where there's grass because it can be hard to hear them coming in. You might hear the hooves, but in some of our thicker country, you hear the crash. And as soon as you hear the crash, like something's walking in, that's when he's officially agreed to come in to fight. And that's when I'll pull back my bow, and I try to time it where I can start seeing the brush move, and I pull back my bow. You do not want the elk to see you pull back your bow. Their eyes are on the side of their head. They have our view as a human is about this far, and elk is behind itself too. So as soon as if you can see the eyes of the elk, it sees you. You do not want the eyes of the elk to see you at all. And so you want to pull back your bow, and that bull walks past you, you want to be completely still. And this is just my exact routine that I like to do. I keep an elk call in my mouth, the bull walks out, and sometimes he's going to walk right past me, right? I'm going to do a quick cow call. just to stop the bull. It's a very natural sound for the elk, right? So it's not something that's going to scare the elk. But all you're doing is getting the stop, stick the bull, it takes off running. He hopefully just goes a little ways and tips over dead. But that's one way to do it. Now, another call that I like to use is, and that I haven't mentioned quite yet, and it's a combination between the challenge bugle and sometimes you can use the, what is called your talking to the cows bugle. I killed a bull back in 2021. He was a 3, what did he score? He was 344. Yeah, and so he was a dandy. And the call he liked to use a lot was he would hardly ever talk to me, but he would talk to his cows. And it's a very short bugle with a growl. So, and there's not even a chuckle. So usually it's just a growl and an end. Let me show you. Starts with a growl. It's a very short bugle. What that's doing is he's talking to his cows. It's usually a communication with his cows and himself. And so, so those are the 4 main calls for bugling, what I like to use. So going back, it's the locate bugle, the display bugle, the challenge bugle, and then with the challenge bugle, you can on and off. Again, you have to put yourself in the mind of the animal. So sometimes if you hear that bull, as you're challenging him to fight, you hear him talk to his ladies, talk to his ladies too. Do that, talk to his cows. And then he's just like, what are you doing? Don't talk to my ladies. I didn't tell you could do that. You know, he gets mad, you know, so you're matching his energy and you're escalating the situation. You're causing a fight to happen, right? And when it all comes together, it's one of the most memorable experiences. Now, the other thing I want to mention too, and this is, so a lot of times we learn these techniques from each other, right? So I hunt with my brother Travis a lot. I hunt with my brother Trevor a lot. Trevor actually taught me something where, you know, I killed a bull point blank at under 5 yards. Beautiful black rack. He's had 6 points on one side, 8 points on the other. And when Trevor, like I told Trevor about the situation, he's like, why didn't you focus the bugle the other way? So many times in my life, I've had people tell me that no matter where you point the bugle, the elk always knows where you're at. In my opinion, that's not true. And Trevor has shown that with he's done a lot of solo hunts like I have where he doesn't have a collar. And sometimes if he wants to direct a bull to walk past him to the right, he directs his bugle to the right and that bull will walk. It kind of distorts the sound a little bit for the elk. And even maybe he can point you out close, but not enough to where he's gonna walk right to you. Usually he can walk past you between 10 to 15 yards, especially if you're in thicker country, right? So that's just a basic sequence and what I do when it comes to calling in big herd bulls. Now, between Travis and I, we look at it over the years. Between him and I, we've killed over 50 bulls. And so, but that's just between Travis and I. That's not even counting the family. And by saying that, we have a lot of experience around elk. We've been around elk. We've seen their behavior, and we're sharing this with you. And we're doing this through the Elk Hunting Masterclass on 360 Sportsman. I highly recommend checking it out. You're gonna love it.
Got him, dropped him. Nice shot, buddy.
Have you ever struggled with hunting elk? Have you spent hours upon hours hiking in the mountains? I've been in your shoes. It just seems like you can't find elk. Well, for years and years of experience between myself, Travis, and the rest of our family, we've created the perfect formula. From elk behavior to hunting herd bulls.
Perfect shot.
There's a little information of everything.
Freaking stud. Thank you, Lord. So blessed.
And it doesn't matter what terrain, from wide open plains to even the desert. I feel like what separates us from the others is we have perfected the tactics in harvesting those big herd bulls.
That's the best bull you've ever killed.
And so I highly recommend checking out Elk Hunting Masterclass from Stuck N The Rut. I promise you're not going to regret it.